I'm a little sick right now. I'll tell you why. I don't mean physically. There's a book that came out called Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin by Timothy Snyder. Probably the most definitive book ever written on the atrocities of Hitler and Stalin and how Stalin and Hitler enabled each other's crimes. It's one of the most shocking books I have ever read in my life. And I finally got it over the weekend. I was afraid to read it because of its graphic nature. Written by a genius, Timothy Snyder, professor of history at Yale. This is a really amazing book. I know what it is to write a real book. And when you start to read what the Nazis did to the Jews, it's enough to make... I mean, I thought I had seen it all. I heard it all. I didn't. There's things in here I never thought could have been done from one human being to another. And one of the reasons I'm bringing it up now, and must bring it up now, is because when we start talking about bankers, when we start talking about cabals, when we start talking about banks and conspiracies, there are many people in the world who are going to start to blame the Jews, as though only Jews are bankers and only Jews are involved in plotting and planning. And this is a most dangerous situation for the world again. You've got to understand that the Holocaust didn't happen overnight. The Holocaust started with whispering campaigns, with lies, with propaganda, and it eventually led to the shaving of the hair of naked Jewish women who were then gassed to death in front of their children. So you got to be very careful where you go with allegations against people of a certain race. And I don't know whether it's worth reading this to you or not. I don't know if I have the guts to read it, frankly, because it'll get me sicker again. And this is a subject I don't even want to get into, the Nazi death factories. The thing for most of you leftists to understand is that although Hitler was the monster he has been put up to be, Stalin was equally as bad as Hitler. And that's something many of you hardcore communists don't want to accept. And you've got to understand that America's wartime ally, Joseph Stalin, had already shot and starved millions of his own citizens in Russia before the war even began, before World War II began. And Stalin, the good communist, continued to kill by the millions throughout the war. And although American soldiers liberated concentration camps, they never reached the death factories, killing fields, and starvation sites where Hitler and Stalin murdered civilians on a massive scale. We know that the Nazi regime killed people, but did you know that together the Nazi and Soviet regimes killed 14 million people in a zone of death between Berlin and Moscow? 14 million people. Can you imagine what number that is? I live in San Francisco, 500,000 people. That means the entire city of 500,000 people is almost an insignificant decimal in terms of the number of people killed by these madmen. Do you know what we mean by killing? Do you have any idea what that means? Do you know what killing a single person means? I'm sure most of us are shocked when we hear about a murder or a beating or a death. But can you virtually imagine killing thousands or millions of people? Can you imagine a society given over to killing a person of a certain race and wiping out the entire race? Well, it happened. But it was happening not just because of Hitler, but also because of Stalin. Equally crazy men. Shall I read some of it for you? Would you like to hear some of this? I'll read you a paragraph, just to give you something to think about and make you realize how good you have it in this country, and how our worst scoundrel in this country is an angel compared to what can happen on this earth. I'll read you from page 268 of Bloodlands, the Nazi death factories. So there were some Jews who escaped from trains, and because of it, the man who was in charge of transporting them to the death camps was removed from his post for incompetence. And in August 1942, Stengel took command at Treblinka. Stengel later said that he regarded the mass gassing of Jews as his profession and that he enjoyed it, quickly put Treblinka in order. Stengel commanded with the help of a particularly vicious assistant, Kurt Franz, whom the Jewish laborers called the Doll, for his vanity and good looks. Franz liked to watch Jews box. He liked to watch his dog attack Jews, and he liked to watch animals in general. At one point, he had the Jewish laborers construct a zoo. The Germans were assisted by a few dozen Treblinka men who served as guards and performed a few essential functions within the facility, such as herding Jews into the gas chambers and releasing the carbon monoxide gas. The rest of the labor was performed by a few hundred Jews, spared from death only in order to carry out tasks associated with mass killing and plunder, and then would doom themselves to a quick death if they showed any sign of weakness. As rumors of Treblinka spread, the Germans engaged in propaganda. The Polish government, in exile in London, had been passing on to its British and American allies reports of the gassings along with other German killings of Polish citizens. Throughout the summer, it urged the British and the Americans to take retributive actions against German civilians to no effect. Officers of the Polish resistance, the Home Army, considered an attack on Treblinka but did not carry one out. The Germans denied the gassings. The chief of the Jewish police in Warsaw, Josef Serinsky, claimed that he had received postcards from Treblinka. All right, I won't read you any more of this, more of that. Within a few months, Stengel had changed the appearance of Treblinka, the death camp, and increased its lethal functionality. Jews who arrived at Treblinka, by the way, if you're a person who, let us say, lost a relative in the camp, I don't know how many are left who did that, or you yourself are a person who did, or you're weak in mind, or you're not feeling well, I'd rather you turn this radio off for about a minute or two, because I don't think you want to hear this. Sometimes reality is too much for the strongest mind. Jews who arrived at Treblinka in late 42 disembarked not to a simple ramp surrounded by dead bodies, but inside a mock train station painted by a Jewish laborer to resemble a real one. It had a clock, a timetable, and ticket counters. As Jews stepped from the station, they could hear the sound of music, played by an orchestra led by the Warsaw musician Arthur Gold. Those Jews who limped or hobbled or otherwise revealed themselves to be weak at this point were taken to a, quote, clinic. Jewish workers with red armbands helped them to a building marked with a red cross. Behind this building, the sick Jews were shot in the back of the neck over a ditch by Germans dressed as doctors. The chief executioner was August Mitte, whom the Jewish laborers called the Angel of Death, Malach HaMavet. Those Jews who could move themselves took a few steps forward into a kind of courtyard where the men and women were separated, men to the right, women to the left, as they were told in German and Yiddish. In the courtyard, the Jews were forced to strip naked, on the pretext that they were to be disinfected before a further transport to the east. Jews had to bundle their clothes neatly and tie their shoes together by the laces. They had to surrender any valuables. Women were subjected to cavity searches. At this point, a few women in some of the transports were selected for rape, and a few men in some of the transports were selected for labor. The women then shared the fate of the rest, whereas the men would live for a few more days, weeks, or months as slave laborers. As the women went to the gas chambers without their clothes and without their hair, each woman had to sit before a Jewish, quote, barber. Religiously observant women who wore wigs had to surrender them. Even at this very last moment before death, people reacted differently individually. For some women, the hair cutting was confirmation of this infection story. For others, it was the proof they were about to be killed. The women's hair was used to be made stockings for German railway workers and to line the slippers worn by German submarine crews. Both groups, first the women and then the men, naked, humiliated, and helpless, were forced to run through a tunnel. It was a few meters wide and about 100 meters long. The Germans called it the Road to Heaven. At its end, Jews might see a large Star of David in the gable over the entrance to a dark room. A ceremonial curtain hung with a Hebrew inscription, "This is the gateway to God. The righteous shall pass through." Probably few enough of them noticed these details, as they were forced roughly inside by the two guards posted at the entrance. One of the men held a piece of pipe, the other a sword, and both yelled and beat the Jews. Then one of them closed and locked the door and called for water, the very last element of the deception, no longer necessary for this doomed group, now sealed in a gas chamber but for whoever else might be waiting. A third man threw a lever, and a tank engine pumped carbon monoxide into the chamber. I'll pause right here because there's no point in reading anymore. This is from this book, Bloodlands, and there is equally chilling anti-humanity seen in the communist Joseph Stalin. And what puzzles me to this day about this chapter of human history is not only how it could happen, but if it could happen again. And when I see the religion of Islam, and I see so many people in the religion of Islam repeating the same blood libel against Jews and against Christians, and I see a stunned denial by the most powerful people in the Western world, I say, can it happen again? And I say it is happening again. And the reason I say it is happening again, because I told you before this little diversion from the banking story, that the Holocaust did not happen outright. It started with a blood libel against the Jews. It started with a hate campaign against the Jews. It started with stories against the Jews. Just as the Muslim fanatics are now spreading and disseminating lies in the UN itself and around the world with hardly a peep from anyone in the Western world. I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, it is happening again. And now I'll take a rest.
Savage.
Let me explain something about myself and why my show has a certain appeal to you if you're a regular listener. I was talking about the banking crisis, the bailout of Europe. I warned you that when you start talking bankers, people immediately start, some of them gossiping, the Jews did it and the Jews did this. Be very, very careful where you go with that. 70 years ago, it led to the deaths of millions from the same kind of drivel. And now we have another confounding variable mixed into the match of anti-Semitism, which is the disease of radical Islam. And now mixed in with that component is the pacifism of the West and the fact that we have no leadership running from Paris to Washington. We have nothing but functionaries and stooges and puppets. There's virtually not a man amongst them willing to stand up to this scourge that threatens to take us down. So be very careful before you start blaming the Jews for the banking crisis, is why I brought it up. But there's another reason, and perhaps the most important reason, that my mind jumped to this book, Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin, by Timothy Snyder, the brilliant historian at Yale. And that is because of Obama. Now, I know you're going to say, what does he have to do with Hitler and Stalin? And I want you to listen to me. I am convinced that Obama himself is a rather nice person, as was Pol Pot of Cambodia. Cambodia, under Pol Pot was a nice professor who went to Paris, studied Marxism, came back and introduced a transformational group of policies in Cambodia that resulted in the death of 3 million fellow Cambodians. If you remember the movie from the 70s with A Mountain of Skulls, they unleashed teenagers in red scarves, known as the Red Brigades, or the Khmer Rouge in that case, who went about rounding up the entire middle class. Anyone with eyeglasses was slave labored or killed. Any policeman, teacher, doctor, lawyer, architect. In other words, anyone with a pair of glasses, anyone with an education was considered a counter-revolutionary in Cambodia and killed. Now, we're not saying that Obama wants to kill the middle class in America. Don't be absurd. But when you see a man as intellectually feeble as Barack Obama, who keeps using the word transformative or transformational, you have to understand that both Hitler and Stalin believed in a transformative utopia that they were trying to create. And in this transformative utopia that they were dreaming of, they had to find a group to be blamed when its realization proved impossible. And in their cases, Hitler and Stalin, mass murder was then used and proclaimed as a kind of victory over that particular class. Now, those of you who have the simplistic schoolbook idea that the Hitlerites were the mass murderers and the Soviets, the communists, were the liberators, I have a lot of news for you. You don't know the first thing about history. You know nothing about history. You have to understand that the 3.3 million killed in the Soviet Ukraine were killed not by Hitler but by Stalin, and the Ukrainians who died in the famine of 1933 that followed Stalin's destructive collectivization of the farms. The farms. Now, Obama has not collectivized the United States farms for better production, yet, period. But he has taken over General Motors. He has nationalized the healthcare system. Do you think it's beyond this man to nationalize agriculture in the United States of America? I would say that this transformational dupe that we have in the White House is capable of anything.
Savage.